And thank you, of course, to the Counter Extremism Project, David, the Konrad Adenauer Stiftung, Stefan. I was thrilled to be asked to co-write this important paper with such an eminent regional expert as Dr. Bakary Sambe. And I am delighted with the editorial and presentational input from CEP and KAS that has produced such an excellent finished product. As has been made clear, Bakary and I decided to divide the task of presenting in this way, that Bakary would provide the analysis and the summary, and I would offer the conclusions and recommendations. And in many ways, I think that harmonizing the international with the local solutions, which Hans has already mentioned, is a lovely reflection of this project, where we have harmonized the local regional expertise with international perspectives. Now, first of all, we argue that Mali and the Western Sahara region are too large and complex for one-size-fits-all solutions. The international community needs to keep in mind JNIM's success in exploiting specific local conditions. Whilst Al-Qaeda ideological validation and international reputation do matter to JNIM, as Hans said, they are really secondary concerns. JNIM doesn't take orders from Al-Qaeda core or depend upon its practical support. So counterterrorism, counter-extremism, and counterinsurgency policies also need to be grounded in the Western Sahel localities and to develop local Sahelian solutions. International support will be needed, but international intervention, French, Russian, UN, or other, will not succeed unless it is based on and reinforcing of a locally designed and accepted overarching strategy. So European and other international decision makers should, I think, consider the following points under this subhead. A, engagement with key governments within JNIM's area of operations in Mali and Burkina Faso remains very challenging at the moment. And at the same time, JNIM is pushing southwards. So policymakers should explore opportunities to intensify cooperation with and security assistance to the littoral countries of the Gulf of Guinea to ensure that this push southwards by JNIM is not successful. B, intensify cooperation with the African Union, which seems open to African-led and African-owned counterterrorism initiatives, and explore how far the lessons learned from Somalia, AMISOM, the African Union mission in Somalia, ATMIS, the African Union transition mission in Somalia, how far those lessons could supply a potential blueprint for similar engagement in the Western Sahel region. C, for those that have not yet done so, member states interested in this area need to develop and maintain appropriate capabilities of your security forces, in particular your intelligence services, to effectively monitor the situation on the ground. And of course, this needs to include incubating adequate language and technical capacities, as well as allocating sufficient resources for the strengthening of active contacts in the Western Sahel. D, for those who have not yet done so, develop and maintain effective internet monitoring to ensure early detection of online activity preparatory to terrorist operations. This could also involve increased cooperation, of course, with internet service providers. Now, the second area of the paper that I want to focus on is concerning kinetic counterterrorism operations. These will remain important, but as in other conflict zones, they are not a sufficient solution in themselves. Sustained improvements in the security situation will not be achieved by playing whack-a-mole. They require a more holistic approach. France and Operation Barkhane especially did achieve a series of high-profile kinetic successes lots of things that could be announced as, you know, progress in counterterrorism. And yet the situation in Mali and its environs has continued to deteriorate. CT solutions need to be fully integrated with strategies to address the underlying causes of terrorism, to prevent and counter extremism, and to promote stabilization and development. The phenomenon of the, quote, communitization of jihad, unquote, and the evolution towards local insurgencies presents a challenge to the established mechanisms of the so-called war on terror. We need to emphasize locally generated strategies with which international approaches must deconflict. So in this area, international decision makers should A, maintain contacts with local communities, including those established through the European Union training mission in Mali or UN engagement. These can be used to map local grievances, to understand what is happening on the ground, to build local trust, and better target humanitarian delivery to those who need it. B, these contacts should be used to engage with power brokers within local communities, to explore how to build resilience against the attempts that JNIM is making to recruit, exploit, and co-opt these communities. And that comes back to the point made earlier about the extent to which JNIM are able to insert themselves as the service providers or the providers of security or the providers of whatever governance is available in some of these outlying areas. Now, the third area that I want to focus on is the conclusion in the report that international rivalry in Mali and the wider region is unhelpful to counterterrorism and to measures to prevent and counter extremism. It's also unhelpful to the delivery of good governance, stabilization, and development. The UN Security Council and the international community are more divided now than was the case when Mali first became a focus of counterterrorism efforts. But unity of purpose must still be the objective if success is to be achieved. There is still a large measure of Security Council agreement on combating ISIL and Al-Qaeda. A zero-sum approach will not serve the interests, even of the more successful competitor. So rivalry must be set aside in favor of a consensual approach towards a common goal. International decision makers should explore engaging actively in listing proposals of key individuals, such as leaders, facilitators, and propagandists of JNIM, to the ISIL Al-Qaeda Sanctions Committee of the Security Council, where a lot of this common purpose on counterterrorism still resides. The objective is to fine-tune targeting of the evolving threat posed by JNIM and its component groups. And this should also involve the provision of updated biographical and biometric data, such as fingerprints and photos, for already listed members of JNIM. And of course, this UN process should be complementary to EU measures against ISIL and Al-Qaeda. Fourthly, good governance and basic standards of human rights and rule of law. This needs to be underlined again and again as the only lasting basis for stabilization in Mali and the wider region, and indeed in other conflict zones. JNIM must be defeated on the ground that they themselves have chosen, showing that they offer no meaningful solution to local disputes or popular concerns, that they are incapable of delivering fairness or security. Central and local authorities need to recover their people's confidence that they are understood, represented, and protected. This needs to project again from Bamako and Ouagadougou beyond the capital cities and their immediate regions to be felt by outlying populations. Here is a huge challenge of governance in many terrorism-afflicted parts of the world, that capital cities and local elites and certain privileged regions must not be favored over outlying areas which come to feel alienated and neglected. So international policymakers should consider engaging with local Malian and Burkinabe power brokers and elites, as well as with civil society organizations, to promote good governance, respect for human rights, and rule of law. This will address the root causes of extremism and undermine the ability of terrorist groups to appeal to local communities. And finally, just to say a few words about the importance of the UN in this whole equation. The UN will be needed to coordinate international support for these affected states, and the UN response will need to factor in not only Mali and Burkina Faso, but also the Gulf of Guinea littoral states that are increasingly threatened and impacted by JNIM. Building resilience in Benin, Côte d'Ivoire, and elsewhere will yield dividends in countering JNIM's strategy of regional expansion. United Nations convening power is an essential asset, both in Mali and the wider region. It should aim to sustain its footprint and ambitions. Now, I recognize, of course, that there are challenges to the functioning of the UN in the region, and I don't want to offer firm prescriptions about exactly how the UN should manage those complexities. I will just finish, though, by urging that international assistance, humanitarian aid, and peace-building efforts must not be disrupted by political turbulence in Mali or elsewhere. The stakes are simply too high to allow that to happen. What we have here is a particularly ambitious and strategically aware manifestation of Al-Qaeda that is seeking to destabilize and overturn United Nations member states, and that must be prevented. Thank you for listening.